Hey, today I'm talking about 3 movies I got for Christmas. Ooh, and these 3 in particular are all Asian-centric. 2 of them are Korean and 1 is Taiwanese. And the names of these 3 movies are Mon Mon Monsters, The Swordsman, and Monstrum. First up is Mon 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 Monsters! Exclamation point. This is a 2018 Taiwanese film, and the basic premise is it's about this boy who constantly gets picked on by this group of bullies, but then he gets brought into the group of bullies around the time that they discover this pair of, let's just say, monsters is the easiest way to describe them, because they're kind of zombies, but they're also kind of vampires, and they're kind of also like a bunch of other things, and I really like them a lot. Yeah, this movie was a lot of fun. It kind of reminded me a bit of Attack the Block in the same regards of like the characters are really not likable. Like every single character in this movie is kind of just awful. Like even the main character is just, he's a little bitch. But this is a horror movie, so a lot of characters die, and it's somewhat satisfying. There were a lot of good, solid kills and deaths in this, and that's, you know, brings it up a lot. I love the style of this movie a lot. It's really great and fun. My big issues with the movie stem from the ending, in so much as the deaths you're like waiting the whole movie for, and you finally get to experience at the end of the movie, you don't get to see, and that really sucks. They happen off camera, and I'm like, why? So that was a bit frustrating. And then also, technically the message of this film is kind of pro-school shooter. I don't think that was their intention, but that's definitely what happens at the end of this movie. And honestly, I was rooting for the monsters the entire time. I really like the monsters. And I think just tweaking the end just slightly, changes who lives and who dies, would actually solve a lot of this movie's issues and would have been really, really good. I still enjoyed it a ton, and I would definitely recommend it if you're a fan of horror stuff and you don't mind following really unlikable characters. So yeah, it's a solid movie with not the best ending, but the rest of the movie more than enough makes up for it. Next up is The Swordsman. This is a 2020 Korean film, and the basic premise of this one is actually very similar to the basic premise of the last one. I'll get to that when I get there. So it is based on a true story about this legendary swordsman who, after something happens in his youth, he decides to retire to the mountains with an adoptive daughter, but then something calls him back out of retirement, basically. And it's pretty good. The sword fighting, as you would hope, is fantastic. Like every single sword fighting scene is a blast. I will complain though, and I will say that since this is based on a true story, it was a little hard for me to kind of accept this as reality sometimes, because he does like some almost superhuman dodging moves, and it's like if this was just not based on real life story, I could accept it more easily, but since this is a true story, it's harder for me to buy. It was still really impressive though. The story was also just a little hard for me to follow at times. I'm not sure why. That could have just been more of a me thing. I think part of it was just like keeping track of who everyone was exactly in the relationship. I really liked the teenage girl. She's a lot of fun, has a lot of heart. I also really, really loved there is a shop owner love interest. She doesn't have a ton in this movie, but every time she's on screen, she was a lot of fun and she had a lot of spirit. I liked her a lot. So yeah, I would also recommend this movie if you're a fan of, you know, martial arts slash sword fighting things. It's a lot of fun and definitely worth your time. And hopefully you can follow it a little bit better than I could. And lastly is Monstrum. This is a 2018 Korean film, and the basic premise is this guy who was a master fighter came across something troubling in his youth. He then rescued a small baby girl and then retired to the mountains and raised her until something spooky happened, and that brought him out of retirement. This is also based on a true story. I believe it's set like 100 years before the previous movie. This one is a little bit more fantastical magical because there is a big scary monster in it. I think it's kind of like Brotherhood of the Wolf, where it was probably just a lion, maybe a lion that was like mutated, or it could have been a bear, but you know how legends go, it turns it into like a larger than life thing. Also, I think the monster in this movie could just be a metaphor for the plague, because it does have the plague, so it's probably similar to like Godzilla in that respect. So it was a little hard for me to suspend my disbelief because of that. You know, it's more metaphorical, what have you. But it was still an interesting movie. I still enjoyed it. There was something that just kind of made the movie look a bit cheap. The monster did look good at times. It looked great at the end. The end was actually fantastic. But there were times earlier in the movie where like they didn't do a good job of blending the monster into the real background. So he was just like a completely different color than the background, and it's like, okay guys, come on, it's not that hard. So that was frustrating. I again enjoyed the teenage girl. Actually, I think she's like 20 in this. She doesn't do as much in this one, though she is kind of more capable. She's more of a warrior, and I did like that a lot. I would recommend it though if you're like a fan of big monster movies. It definitely isn't bad by any means. Or if your interest is piqued by it, it's definitely not a waste of time. Just don't expect to get your mind blown by anything. It's a solid little film, but it's not going to change your life. Alrighty, now for today's rankings. First up, we got Mon 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 Monsters sitting at number 2 in the quite like section. It is the top of the quite liked. And then literally right behind it is the Swordsman sitting at number 3, also in the quite like section. And then bringing up the rear, not that far behind, is Monstrum, sitting at number 5 in the liked section. And this is out of a total of 6 old movies so far this year.